I still remember that evening as if it happened yesterday. My heart was calm, my mind at ease. I was just going to see my son-in-law, maybe share tea, maybe talk about my daughter, a simple visit. But life never warns you before it rips your soul apart. As I turned into his street, headlights glowing in the dusk, something caught my eyes. A car. A silver car. My wife's car, parked neatly by his gate. At first I told myself, it must be a coincidence. Maybe she came here for some reason. But deep down, something inside me twisted. My chest grew heavy. I slowed down. I turned off my engine. I sat there in the dark like a hunter, watching prey. Then I heard it. Laughter. Faint but sharp. The kind of laughter I hadn't heard from my wife in years, and it was coming from inside my son-in-law's house. My throat dried. My hands shook on the steering wheel. In that single moment, 50 years of my life seemed to burn away. What was she doing here? Why, of all places, of all people? I moved closer quietly. The window was open just enough for words to spill out. And what I heard froze my blood. Words no husband should ever hear. Words no father should ever accept. That night, as I stood outside the gate of my own daughter's home, I swore silently. They will both regret betraying me. I was never born with silver in my pocket or gold in my hands. I came from a small village, the kind where people knew each other's names, but nobody cared for another's struggles. From a young age I worked. While other boys played cricket in the dusty fields, I carried bricks on construction sites, earning a few rupees to bring bread home. I remember walking home barefoot with torn clothes, my palms blistered, but my heart proud because at least my family wouldn't sleep hungry. When I married my wife, I thought life had finally given me a companion. She was beautiful, quiet, and I believed she would stand by me through thick and thin. I worked harder after that, driving trucks, doing night shifts, carrying loads heavier than my own body could handle. Every rupee I earned I spent on my family, not on myself, never on myself. I dreamed of giving my wife everything she deserved, gold bangles, a comfortable home, a peaceful life. But more than that, I dreamed of raising my daughter like a princess, even if I lived like a beggar. And when my daughter was born, I held her tiny fingers and swore to God, I will protect you, I will provide for you, even if it kills me. I kept that promise. I still remember the nights when she was little, sick with fever, burning with heat. My wife slept, but I stayed awake, placing wet cloth on her forehead, praying for her health. I skipped meals so she could have milk. I sold my own mother's jewelry to pay her school fees. I wore the same pair of shoes for 10 years, but I made sure she had new ones every year. I wasn't just her father. I was her shield, her servant, her teacher, and her silent guardian. When she grew older, she wanted books, and I bought them even if it meant walking 10 miles to the city and carrying them on my back. When she dreamed of university, I sold the last piece of land I owned just to pay for her education. My neighbors laughed at me. They said, "Why sacrifice everything for a daughter? She will marry one day and leave." But I never cared. I wanted her to fly, even if my wings broke in the process. And when she finally married, when she walked away dressed in red, I smiled though my heart cracked in half. I told myself, she is safe now. She has a husband. My work as a father is done. But it wasn't done, because loneliness crept into my bones. My wife, by then, had grown distant. The love that once lit her eyes for me had become cold embers. She barely spoke, barely smiled. I tried. I cooked for her sometimes. I brought her flowers from the roadside. I told her stories of our youth. But she never looked at me the way she once did. I told myself it was old age, routine, the silence that comes after years of marriage. I accepted it. So I filled my empty evenings with small joys. I tended a little garden behind our house. I fixed broken chairs. I read old newspapers over and over until the print faded. I found happiness in little things, hearing my daughter's voice on the phone, watching children play in the street, sipping hot tea alone while the rain tapped against the window. I never complained, because in my heart I thought I still had something priceless, a family. I thought my wife, though distant, was still mine. I thought my son-in-law respected me. I thought my daughter was safe. I believed, like a fool, that all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the empty stomachs, and the broken back had built a life of love and loyalty. Yes, I was an old man. My hair was gray, my body weak, but my soul was still warm with hope. I only wanted peace in my last years. Not riches, not recognition, just peace. But life is cruel. Because when you give everything, when you pour your soul into others, sometimes all you get in return is betrayal. And when it came for me, it struck like lightning. That night outside my son-in-law's gate still haunts me. At first I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it wasn't her car. Maybe my tired old eyes were playing tricks. But no, I knew every scratch, every dent on that silver car. I had polished it with my own hands. That car was hers, my wife's. My heart began to beat like a drum. Why was she here? Why at this hour? I stepped closer, hiding in the shadows. The gate was slightly open, just enough for voices to spill out. And then I heard it. Her voice. Sweet, playful. A voice she hadn't used with me in years. She laughed. A soft, girlish laugh that pierced me like a knife. "Don't worry," she whispered. "He doesn't suspect anything. He still thinks I'm shopping at the market." My blood froze. He? Doesn't suspect? Who was she talking about? Then came my son-in-law's voice, calm, confident, smug. "Good," he said. "As long as the old man stays blind, we're safe." The old man, that's what he called me, not father-in-law, not Baba, not even by name. The old man. I clenched my fists so tight my nails cut into my palm. Inside they laughed together, laughed at me. My throat burned, my eyes blurred. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I pressed myself against the cold wall and listened, each word heavier than a stone. My wife sighed. "Sometimes I feel guilty." He chuckled. "Guilty? For what? He's nothing now. He's weak. He can't give you what I can." Weak. Nothing. Those words stabbed deeper than any knife. I wanted to burst in, scream, tear the world apart. But I couldn't move. My legs were heavy, my chest hollow. Then she said words that shattered me completely. "I wasted 30 years with him. 30 years. And now I finally feel alive." I staggered back, my knees trembling. 30 years? Wasted? 30 years of sweat, blood, sacrifice, just wasted? My son-in-law pulled her closer. I could hear it in his voice, dripping with arrogance. "Don't think about him. Think about us. Think about what we'll have when he's gone." Gone. My breath stopped. Were they waiting for me to die? Dreaming of it? My wife giggled softly. "Yes, when he's gone, all of this will be ours." In that moment, I felt my soul leave my body. Shock, pure shock, then sadness, a deep, hollow sadness that made my chest ache. I remembered every sleepless night I stayed awake for her, every penny I saved to buy her bangles, every time I gave her my last piece of bread so she wouldn't go hungry. And here she was, laughing with my daughter's husband. The sadness turned to disbelief. I wanted to convince myself I had misheard, that maybe they were talking about someone else, that maybe this was all a nightmare. But no, it was real. Every word was clear, sharp, undeniable. And then came anger. A slow fire lit inside me. My tears dried. My hands stopped shaking. My heart hardened into stone. I whispered to myself in the darkness, "After everything, after all I gave, this is what I get?" I watched as they came out later that night. My wife fixed her clothes, her hair, her face glowing with a smile I hadn't seen in decades. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. "Drive safe," my son-in-law said, kissing her hand. "I will," she answered, her voice soft and tender, softer than she ever spoke to me anymore. I turned away before my rage exploded. I couldn't let them see me. Not yet. When she came home, I asked, trying to hold my trembling voice steady, "Where were you?" "Shopping," she replied coldly, without looking at me. "Shopping." She said it as if nothing had happened, as if I were a fool sitting in a corner, too blind to see the truth. That was the moment my sadness burned away, leaving nothing but fury. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought I was finished. But they were wrong. Because in Tontant, old man's tears can turn into fire, and that fire was now alive in me. I remember the night like a wound I keep reopening. I walked into my dark house and the floorboards moaned under my tired feet. The lamp flickered, as if the room itself was hesitant to witness what was left of my life. I sat at the old wooden table, the same table where we once laughed, argued, planned, and cried. Tonight it felt enormous, empty, mocking. My hands trembled as I reached for my cup of tea. The tea was cold. I did not notice until I took a sip. For a long time I simply stared at the window, watching the streetlight paint a thin, lonely line across the floor. Memories came like ghosts. My daughter's first steps, her small hands in mine, the night she called me at midnight because of a fever. I thought of the time I stayed awake in the rain carrying water to save her crops, of the years I walked miles for a day's wage, of the nights I swallowed my pride so my family could eat. I thought of the sleepless nights I spent worrying about bills, about her schooling, about whether I had done enough. And then I thought of that laughter, her laughter, carried like a cut through my memory. It felt like someone had taken a knife to the picture of my life and carved away the parts that mattered. Grief settled over me, not like a single blow, but like a slow, relentless storm. I let it come. I let it soak my shirt, my bones, my mind. For days I wandered the house like a man without a name. I watched them from behind curtains. I heard their footsteps, their quiet conversations, the careless clink of their cups. Each sound was salt in an open wound. At night, the house was a theater of betrayal. I replayed the words I had overheard until they became a refrain. "He's nothing. When he's gone, we'll have everything." I would wake in the middle of the night with my heart hammering and the same small, searing shame, that the man who married my daughter could speak like that of the father who raised her. Days blurred into a single, long ache. My appetite left me. The old radio in the corner hummed like a reminder of life continuing outside my collapse. One afternoon I found myself cleaning the garden shed, my hands working because my mind could not stop thinking. I found an old photograph of my daughter on a paper-thin stand. Her smile was innocent, unknowing. I held it like a relic and sobbed like a child. Shame. That's what struck next. Shame that I had been blind. Shame that I had trusted with my whole chest. Shame that my love had been used as a ladder by those I sheltered. But shame alone would not be enough. I felt it wash through me, and then, like heat spreading under ice, something else began to come alive. I began to imagine other endings, endings where I did not bow my head, where I did not fade. In the small hours I started to rehearse words I would not say aloud yet. You will pay for this. You will see what it costs to play with a man's honor. At first it was fantasy, a dangerous, warm fantasy that calmed my nights. Then the fantasy grew teeth. It sharpened into thought. It organized itself into a plan inside my head, quiet, methodical, patient. I pictured the look on their faces when truth came for them, the confusion, the flailing, the desperate lies. I pictured the moment their laughter would be replaced by silence. Anger arrived like a train with no brakes, not the foolish, blinding kind that breaks people in two, but a slow, burning heat that focused me. I found myself cataloging every slight, every cold shoulder, every small humiliation. Each one was a stone, and together they built a wall inside me that would not fall. I caught myself smiling sometimes, an ugly, small smile, when I thought of the justice waiting to be served. It was not pleasure in their suffering. It was relief at the thought of truth finally being known, relief that my daughter would not be the only one carrying the scars. I walked through the town and watched people. The butcher who cheated a customer once, the neighbor who lied about a fence. Everyone had reasons to hide. Everyone had secrets. If I could uncover a petty lie, I could uncover greater ones. If I could find a crack, I could pry it open. I thought of power, not the kind that comes from money or muscle, but the quiet kind that comes from evidence, patience, and timing. I remembered the nights I had sat in business meetings, the slight nods, the documents, the trust that binds people. I had seen how small a world it takes to hide a betrayal. That's when the decision hardened, not in a rage, but in a cold, precise way. Enough of being the grieving man, enough of being the silent fool. I promised myself I would not be the man who only remembers. I would be the man who acts. I would collect truth as a hand collects firewood, piece by piece, until there was enough to make a blaze that would illuminate everything. I thought of my daughter, how I had raised her, how she deserved honesty, how she deserved the dignity to choose with full knowledge. This was not revenge for my ego, this was a duty to the truth and to the child I had raised. I considered my age and then crushed that thought. Age is a number. Hunger and will are the real measures. I told myself, you will put pride aside. You will be cleverer than their cunning. You will be quieter than their lies. The anger settled into discipline. Nights of rage became plans written on the inside of my eyelids. I began to watch without being seen. I listened for the little things, names, dates, times. I noticed patterns, small things that their arrogance had left unguarded. I learned to wait. Patience became my ally. I bided my time like someone who keeps a kettle on a low flame until it's ready to boil. I practiced control. I kept my face soft around them, gentle even, until the moment I needed to be steel. Sometimes I caught my reflection and saw a man transformed, eyes clearer, shoulders straighter, voice steadier, not the old fool they assumed I was. There were moments of doubt, too, nights when loneliness crept back and whispered, "Is this worth it?" But each doubt was answered by a memory. The night I gave my last coin for her tuition, the time I carried her schoolbooks, the afternoons I mended shirts while my hands bled. Those memories no longer made me ache. They made me resolute. They were the fuel for what I intended. I rehearsed the words I would use when the time came, but I also rehearsed silence, how to let them speak, how to let them hang themselves with their own words. I made a vow, not out loud, but so fierce it rattled the bones. No more humiliation, no more being the punchline of their secret jokes. Enough is enough. The phrase echoed in my head like a bell. Enough is enough. It was not a cry. It was a command, a settling of accounts between who I had been and who I was about to become. I put on my coat that night, as if dressing for a ceremony, and stepped out with a slow, measured breath. I walked past their house deliberately, not to spy, but to remind myself where truth must land. And standing under the streetlight, with the silence pressing around me, I finally said the words I had kept inside for so long. Enough is enough. I felt something within me shift, grief bending into purpose, sorrow hardening into resolve. I would not let the last years of my life be stolen by their lies. I would not be forgotten as weakness. I promised myself then, beneath that indifferent moon, that I would take back what was mine, dignity, my daughter's peace, and the truth. And with that promise sealed in the quiet of my chest, I added another, colder vow, one they would hear soon enough. They will regret the day they ever thought to betray me. I learned quickly that anger without plan is wind. So I let the wind die down and lit a small, steady lamp instead, something that would burn long and reveal everything when the time came. First, I pretended to be smaller than I was. I put on the face of the old man they thought they could step over, gentle, forgetful, harmless. I smiled more. I asked about the weather. I fixed the kettle. I let them talk. Every laugh they shared, every careless word, was a thread I began to pull. I began with little things. Observation. Not the flashy kind that draws attention, but the slow, patient watching of habits, where she parked, what times he left the house, who called in the afternoons. Patterns emerged like maps. I kept a small notebook. I wrote times, faces, phrases. My handwriting became a ledger of their dishonesty. Then I collected proof the honest way. Receipts, photographs, old messages. I used a camera like a witness, catching shadows, license plates, meetings in cafes. I never forced a door or broke a lock. I preferred truth that would stand in the light, not lies that crumbled under scrutiny. I also listened. People reveal their own guilt when they are comfortable. A wrong word, a slip of a name, those were gifts. I learned to be patient enough to wait for them to give me what I needed. Sometimes it was a line they muttered on the phone. Sometimes it was laughter that came too soon. Those were the tiny nails I hammered into the coffin of their lies. Money had a way of following footprints. I checked accounts with the help of an old friend who owed me more than loyalty. He owed me truth. He was careful, honorable, and the kind of man who knew how to pull records without making them into gossip. I called in favors, a former co-worker who still had contacts, a neighbor who liked gossip a little too much, a clerk who saw ledgers pass across a desk. I paid where necessary, not with ruinous sums, but with the honesty of a man determined. I found an ally in my daughter's best friend, a woman with a quiet courage. She had suspected for months and had been too loyal to speak. When I showed her one small picture, she became my shadow, discreet, fierce, and careful. Together, we created moments where questions could be asked without alarming those under suspicion. We planted seeds of curiosity in places they could not control. I also prepared legally. I spoke to a lawyer, not to raise a war cry, but to know the battlements. What evidence would stand in court? What proof would break contracts, freeze assets, reveal infidelity where it mattered? Knowing the rules became my shield. I learned the language of papers, affidavits, timestamps, certified copies. It was dull work, but precise. Each stamp and signature was a small hammer that would one day fall. At the same time, I dressed my home in normalcy. I mended curtains, swept the yard, sat quietly at family meals. I let them believe I was still the man who could be fooled. It was the hardest part, to smile while a plan burned hot inside. Because the best revenge, I decided, would not be a moment of spectacle, but a collapse built slowly, an exposure so complete there would be nowhere left for them to hide. I made sure to protect my daughter's innocence. I would not let her be dragged into a public pit until she had the truth and the choice. That required patience. It required restraint. I learned to swallow the small triumphs of finding evidence until the pile was enough. I wanted a case, not a tantrum. I wanted her dignity preserved. So everything I gathered was held like a secret treasure in a locked drawer, pieces of a larger truth not thrown at the feet of an angry crowd. I set traps that were moral rather than criminal. I offered convivial meetings that invited mistakes, dinners where phones were left on tables, family gatherings where someone might speak too loudly, casual visits, time to observe behavior in daylight. They came unguarded because they thought they were safe. Arrogance reveals more than stealth ever could. Sometimes I tested them with silence. I would be absent for an evening and watch how the house rearranged itself. Did they miss me? Did their stories change? Silence in those moments was a lens through which the truth became visible. I also tended to my own reputation quietly, lifting friends who doubted, answering questions that might arise with calmness, and ensuring that when the truth surfaced, people would listen to me as someone honest, not a vengeful old man spinning tales. Reputation matters. A single liar can silence 1,000 honest men if the honest man lets his temper speak louder than his evidence. Every week I added to the pile one photograph, a printed message, a bank entry, a witness who would swear on what they had seen. It was like building a wall brick by brick, quiet, steady, impossible to dismantle once complete. I kept my daughter's routine steady. University visits, coffee with friends, phone calls. I watched her with the fierce tenderness of a man who had no right to break her world for the sake of his anger. There were nights I could have acted sooner, torn down doors, shouted in markets, dragged them into the street. But those were the nights I learned the value of patience. The earlier victory might have been raw and satisfying, but it would have been fleeting. I wanted something that lasted. So I waited, and the waiting became part of the plan. Waiting taught me to read the smallest cues: a lipstick on a collar, a scent in a scarf, a hesitation in a voice. Each small proof was another thread woven into the tapestry I was making. I also gathered witnesses: a shopkeeper who saw late-night purchases, a driver who recognized the stops, and a quiet maid who kept to herself but remembered faces. They were not sensational allies. They were ordinary people with ordinary memories that, when stitched together, formed a portrait of truth. I decided the moment of revelation would be clever, but not cruel. I wanted them exposed, not maimed. I aimed to break the structure of lies so my daughter could rebuild her life on clean ground. That was the moral arc I clung to. Still, I kept one card close to my chest. A final move that I hinted at to a few trusted companions, but revealed to no one fully. It was the thing I would use when the evidence had made them stumble and the law had set its stage. Sometimes, late at night, I whispered parts of the plan to myself like a prayer. I rehearsed how to present proofs, how to remain calm, how to hold my daughter when the world trembled. I practiced the voice I would need, steady, uncompromising, but compassionate. I practiced not to hurt, but to show. To prove that what they called old was in fact a reserve of will they had never measured. People often ask me why I did not go to the police at once. The answer was simple. I wanted truth, not rumors, finality, not gossip. The law, when armed with unassailable evidence, would be my most impartial ally. So I prepared the evidence to the highest standard I could. I would not let them claim misinterpretation, coincidence, or fabrication. I left little room for any of their excuses. There were moments of fear, moments when the enormity of what I planned pressed down on me, and I wondered if I had become the kind of man I once despised. But each time doubt crept in, I remembered my daughter's face the night she confronted me with tears. Not for me, but for herself. And I knew the plan was not for spite. It was to restore her future. When the pile was heavy enough, and the witnesses certain, I let one small thing slip. Not enough to ruin the plan, but enough to unsettle them. A message left accidentally where she might see it, a printed receipt, a face in a photo subtly placed. They reacted, just as arrogance promised. Said, they adjusted, covered, rearranged. Each reaction gave me the confirmation I needed that the next step would topple what remained. I taught myself to be patient like a farmer waiting for rain. I had sown seeds of truth, and now I waited for the right monsoon to wash away the filth. What I would do next I would carry out with quiet hands and an honest heart. I would not stoop to their level. I would not become the joke they made me into. I would become, instead, the force of consequence. And so I kept one secret folded like a blade in my pocket, a final step that would not be revealed here, not now. Let them laugh. Let them live in their little nest of lies a little longer. When the time comes, the nest will burn, and they will know, in the deepest marrow, that I was never the old fool they assumed. What will that final step be? For now, that is mine to know, and theirs to fear. The night I chose to act, I wore my ordinary clothes, the same shirt they saw every day, because the last thing I wanted was theatrics. Revenge, I had learned, works best dressed as truth. I began where facts mattered most, The family dinner I had planned for my daughter's birthday. Everyone would be there. That was the point. They were comfortable, arrogant, safe. I let the evening be warm at first. Laughter, candles, stories of the past. My hands were steady when I poured the tea. My voice was the calm one they expected. Inside, I held a folder that felt heavier than any sack of bricks I'd carried in my life. When the cake came, I made a small speech about family and honesty. My daughter clapped, smiling with the innocence of someone who still loved both parents. I fought to keep my face soft. Patience, I told myself. Patience. Then, I did the simple thing people always forget. I invited them to remember. I put the first photograph on the table, a clear picture of my wife's car by his gate, time-stamped, taken with a small camera I had left in the bushes months earlier. The room fell into a small, uneasy silence. As I watched the color drain from my wife's face, she looked at the photo like a child caught with a hand in a cookie jar. My son-in-law laughed at first, then grew tight-lipped. "Coincidence," he said. "Could be anyone's car." I nodded, as if I entertained the thought. Then I placed another photograph beside it, her leaving his apartment late at night, scarf fluttering, his hand on her shoulder. Clear, undeniable. The laughter died. The cake sat abandoned, melting in its frosting. My daughter's eyes flicked between us like someone looking for an instruction she had never been given. I played the first recorded voice next. I had taught myself to speak only when the evidence sang. The small speaker on the table carried their voices. Casual, cruel, the same words I had heard at the gate. "He'll never know," they said. "We'll have everything when he's gone." My daughter's face collapsed. My wife tried to take the recorder, but my lawyer, the man I had quietly brought in as an ally, stopped her hand with a look that needed no words. "This is only the beginning," I said softly. "There is more." I revealed the bank statements next. Photocopies my friend had pulled for me, transfers from a joint account, funds rerouted to businesses registered in my son-in-law's name. He had used family money as seed capital for his schemes, and my wife had signed in careless strokes. He tried to justify it with slick words and a shaky smile, but the paper was patient. It bore dates, amounts, signatures. Numbers do not forgive. When the room tried to breathe again, I called in other pieces from the quiet life I had lived while they plotted. A maid I had befriended stood and told under oath to the family and my lawyer how late-night deliveries happened, how envelopes were passed, how he once asked her to shred something. Her voice was small but steady. She had waited for someone to believe her. Then came the twist they did not expect. I had never wanted to humiliate my daughter publicly, but I had reserved one move that would show the full picture without exaggeration. I produced a notarized affidavit from an old business partner. The son-in-law had been siphoning clients and altering contracts to hide commissions. The partner had once trusted him. When the figures didn't add up, he had watched and then, quietly, prepared to speak. My son-in-law's face went a shade paler. He lunged for excuses, for blame, for anything but truth. He was a man who had built his arrogance on other people's good faith. Now that foundation cracked. At that moment, my daughter stood up. She had been silent, wounded, but not broken. "Show me everything," she said, voice steady but raw. She listened to pages of facts I placed before her. Then she did what I had no right to expect. She read, and she saw. The husband she loved was the architect of their ruin. They tried one last trick, to gaslight the room, to claim I had fabricated pictures, bought witnesses, invented records. Arrogance met a wall of corroboration. My allies, the driver who remembered his late-night routes, the shopkeeper who kept receipts, each stepped forward, their small truths stitched into a quilt that left no cold corner for lies. But the real twist came after the house. My lawyer had been briefed to act swiftly. He froze accounts that were traceable to my daughter's name. He filed for an emergency injunction to prevent the sale of property my son-in-law had secretly listed. He launched the official complaint that opened the door to a regulatory audit of the business he ran. I watched from the doorway as their lives began to unravel in not very quiet administrative ways. Papers arrived, Notices, calls from banks, men in suits who ask questions with polite cruelty. The son-in-law tried to charm them, boo. Ye charm does not repair forged ledgers. People who had once applauded him now asked for meetings he could not avoid. Contracts were suspended. Clients asked for explanations. The very business he had leaned on as proof of his worth became the instrument of his undoing. My wife tried to bargain with me privately. Tears, promises, the old lines she had used when her jewelry was lost. When the rain leaked through the roof, she promised to leave him, to confess, to give everything back. I listened until the end, and then I said, "You chose." There was another turn I had not advertised. A small video clip, anonymous but authentic, sent to several of his business associates, showing him accepting an envelope from a vendor in return for preferential invoices. He had been careless. Arrogance leaves fingerprints. The clip moved faster than any court could. Reputation, once tarnished, evaporates trust in days. I ensured my daughter had protection, legal counsel, a small safe with documents proving her innocence, a bank account in her name under my oversight. She was not to be prey to the vultures that circle around scandal. I would not allow them to use her suffering to salvage their pride. Public humiliation was not the point. The point was exposure. Once truth is visible to those who matter, lies cannot hide in the corners anymore. Friends left. Invitations stopped. The social currency he traded in collapsed. He had built his house of cards on other people's silence. I had called the wind. There were minor, human cruelties I permitted myself. I returned his glare when he entered my shop. I answered the calls from creditors with quiet, calm honesty. I met his indignation not with vengeance, but with law and records. That, to me, was a mercy. I showed him the power of being defeated by proof, not by a fist. But not all went perfectly. He tried to bribe a witness, a Malden, apt man with a cheap conscience. He was caught on a recorder, offering money for silence. The recording was the nail that the law drove in. He was arrested for attempted bribery. Small men fall fastest. The bitter irony was not lost on me. As legal processes unfolded, the son-in-law's public persona imploded. News spread in small circles at first, then wider. Friends called, neighbors whispered. He lost clients, then partners, then pride. He slunk into the cheap corners of places he once owned. My wife's last attempt at redemption was an act of desperation. She tried to take a portion of my daughter's savings, the last safety she clung to. My daughter found her in the act, and for the first time I saw not the child I raised, but a woman who had finally shed her fear and taken control. She called the police herself. Her voice, once fragile, was now a blade of clarity. Courtrooms followed. Papers were examined, witnesses cross-checked. My son-in-law could not speak his way out of arithmetic. He could not charm the ledger. He pleaded, he blamed. But the law is slow, but it is precise. It does not care for loud mouths. When the verdicts began to settle, the consequences were measured and public. Restitution, penalties, the loss of licenses for shady practices. His business folded, not with the clang of a dramatic fall, but with the quiet sound of doors being locked and seals being put in place. My wife? She left with nothing. The small comforts she had sought, jewelry bought with secret money, hidden accounts, were accounted for and returned where they belonged. She stood on the steps of the courthouse, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. There was no triumph in that sight, only a hollow place where love used to be. At the end of it all, my daughter hugged me in a parking lot under a tired sun. She cried, yes, but they were not the same tears as before. These were tears of reclaiming, of relief, of someone who had been given truth and could now choose. She held me like a woman who had found the sand, eddy shore after a long swim. I had wanted them to be punished, yes, but what I had wanted more was that they be made unable to hurt anyone ever again. The law did that better than any drama could. They were exposed, they were accountable. They lost the freedom to hurt with impunity. Walking away from the courtroom, I felt exhaustion in my bones and a strange, quiet satisfaction. Not joy, Revenge is not sweetness. It is the settling of a crooked score. It is that brittle peace you get after a long winter. I did not dance on their ruins. I did not gloat. I let the paperwork and the witnesses and the truth do the collapsing for me. My role had been to wait and to make sure the house of cards was removed by hands sanctioned to do so. In the weeks after, people who had doubted me apologized in small voices. Some came with food, others with help to fix a leaky roof. My daughter rebuilt in small steps, a new apartment, new routines, friends who stayed because they were real. And my betrayers? They existed in smaller, humbler worlds. The son-in-law called once, a voice reduced to a whisper, asking for forgiveness. I did not answer. My wife wrote a letter of apology that arrived folded and careful. I placed it in a drawer and closed it. Revenge had done its work. It had torn the cloak of lies away, left the guilty exposed, and given my daughter the chance to choose a better life. Justice had arrived not with fireworks, but with the slow grinding of truth made incontrovertible. As I sat on my porch that evening, the folder empty now, I understood the most unexpected twist of all. I felt lighter, not because I had hurt them, but because I had protected what mattered most. I had proven that giving everything did not make me powerless. It made me precise. They paid their price. I kept my dignity. My daughter kept her future. That, in itself, was enough. When the dust fit. Nally settled, I found myself sitting alone in the same kitchen where the storm had first begun. The table was the same, the chair was the same, but I was not the same man anymore. The folder that once held all the evidence was now empty, tucked away in the drawer. No more late-night recordings, no more photographs, no more ledgers, just silence. At first, the silence was strange, almost heavy. I had lived so long with the sound of betrayal echoing in my head that its absence felt foreign, like stepping into a room you've known all your life, only to find the furniture gone. My wife was gone from the house. She had left in disgrace, carrying nothing but her clothes. I did not chase her. I did not curse her. I simply let the door close behind her, the final chapter of a book I never wished to write. My son-in-law. His name became nothing more than a whisper in town, spoken with contempt. His business collapsed. His partners fled, and the same people who once shook his hand now avoided him on the street. He learned the truth the hard way. Arrogance builds castles on sand. And my daughter, my heart, my pride, she began her slow healing. She moved into a modest apartment not far from me. For the first time in years, she visited without tension. We cooked together. We laughed again, though sometimes the laughter was shaky, broken by memories she was still trying to bury. One evening, she placed her head on my shoulder, like she did when she was a child. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered. Those 3 words were worth more than all the gold in the world. In that moment, I knew I had not fought in vain. But don't misunderstand me. Revenge is not sweetness. It does not erase the scars. I still wake some nights to the sound of imagined laughter outside the gate. I still feel the sting of humiliation when I remember how blind I had been. Some wounds never vanish. They only scab over. Yet with each sunrise, the weight on my chest grew lighter. The bitterness drained, leaving behind something I never expected. Clarity. I understood at last that revenge had, not been about destroying them. It had been about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my worth, my right to stand unbroken. Neighbors began to greet me differently, not with pity, but with respect. They saw a man who had been wronged and had not bowed. They saw someone who had walked through fire and come out with his soul intact. I spent more time in the garden, planting tomatoes, pruning roses, listening to the sparrows. Small things became precious again. A cup of tea steaming in the morning air, my daughter's laughter when I burned the rice, the way the evening sun painted the walls in gold. There were moments of sadness, too. I mourned the years I had given to a wife who chose betrayal over loyalty. I mourned the trust that would never be the same. Betrayal takes more than it gives back. That is its cruelest truth. Still, I refused to let sorrow dictate the rest of my life. I reminded myself, I had lived through storms before. Poverty, loneliness, hardship. This was just another storm, and I had survived. One day, a young neighbor asked me for advice about marriage. He had heard whispers of what I had endured. I smiled, a weary smile, and said, "Trust is a gift. Guard it. And if someone breaks it, don't break yourself in return. Stand. Always stand. Because that is the lesson, isn't it? Revenge is not about violence or cruelty. True revenge is living in such a way that those who wronged you can no longer touch your soul. True revenge is exposing lies with truth, facing cruelty with patience, and proving that you are stronger than the storm meant to drown you. I had not raised my daughter to see her father as weak. I had shown her that dignity is a shield stronger than deceit. That was my victory. On my porch, watching the evening sky bleed into orange and purple, I whispered to myself, "They thought they buried me, but they planted me." And perhaps that is the moral I want to leave with anyone who listens to my story. When betrayal finds you, and it will, in one form or another, don't let it turn you into the same kind of monster that hurt you. Don't rush for revenge like a starving wolf. Wait. Gather your strength. Let truth be your blade and patience your shield. Because in the end, betrayal only wins if it makes you bitter. But if you rise from it with your dignity intact, if you turn the pain into clarity, then you have already won. I did not seek revenge to destroy them. I sought revenge to rebuild myself, and in that rebuilding, I found something greater than justice. I found peace. So remember this: trust can be broken, love can be betrayed, but dignity is yours to protect. Guard it with everything you have. That is the true revenge. That is the legacy I will leave behind.